Hi, everyone. Welcome to OHEL's webinar, Parenting Young Children in Wartime. This webinar is dedicated to all of the parents in Israel who are so courageously getting up each day, putting up one foot in front of the other to see to your children's needs, to create safety for your kids when the world outside is so unsafe. I want to thank OHEL CEO David Menzel and our board of directors for supporting us in our work to provide resources to the community since the war began. I would like to also thank our OHEL team, Carly Namzer, Cheryl Chernovsky, Bracha Rapp, and Laura Bart, who's also been working tirelessly to put these resources together. We have many videos and webinars that we produced, and as well as tip sheets that are available on OHEL's website. We have a special page for different resources. We're going to put the link in the chat so that you can access them. If you registered for this webinar, it means that you're on our email list and we'll be able to share our resources with you. Tomorrow, we're going to have another webinar on educating our youth during a time of war at 1 p.m. And Thursday, we'll have a webinar on Lone but Not Alone at 3 p.m. for parents of lone soldiers. We will also be releasing programming for young children in the form of a puppet show by Sari Kapitnikoff that will help kids put a name to some of what they're going through. So stay tuned for that. It will also be hosted on our resource page, and we will be sending it out to the community, everyone on our email list. We are joined today by three very esteemed panelists, Raizel Kelson, Dr. Peril Agustin, and Dr. Norman Blumenthal. I will introduce each of them before they each speak respectively. They're each going to give some remarks to our topic today, and afterwards we're going to do a Q&A. So we have a bunch of questions that came in before the webinar, and of course, please feel free to submit your questions live in the chat box. You can ask questions to either everyone, or you can ask them privately to the panelists. And we're going to do our best to make time at the end to answer your questions. Before we begin, I would like to quote my dear colleague, Naomi Baum. Dr. Naomi Baum is a psychologist who specializes in trauma and resilience. She's in Israel now. She's the parent of several children who are actually fighting on the front lines. And she spoke at the very first webinar that we hosted the Monday after the war. And she gave a very beautiful Dvar Torah that I really would like to repeat. It's very apropos for this topic right now. She quoted her daughter Sashi, and she quoted from Tehillim, Kochaf Aleph, Sher Hamalais, Esa Onai El Haharen, May Ayin Yavo Ezri. That is interpreted as, I lift my eyes up to the hills, from where does my salvation come? Her daughter Sashi quoted a commentary on it, Medrash and Bereshis Rabbah, Yehoshua ben Rabbi Nachman, who gave it a beautiful interpretation for these times of crisis. He said, Esa Enai El Hahorim Me Ayin Yavo Ezri. I lift my eyes up to my parents, my Horim, who raised me and who love me for my salvation. I lift my parents and I look to my parents for safety to get through these terribly trying times, because parents set the tone for children going through hard times. Dr. Charles Nelson, a psychologist and neuroscientist who researches childhood adversity, said, parents provide this layer of protection between the child and this awful world that's going on around them. Parents can create safety even when the world outside isn't safe. Parents can strive to create routines even among chaos. Parents who work at keeping themselves regulated are best able to do that. But being regulated doesn't mean parents are calm all the time, which is not possible with everything going on. It doesn't mean parents don't feel sadness, worry, rage, and anxiety. Parents do feel all of these things, and they can even express these things. But what they also try to do is model the ability to cope with these feelings. And it doesn't mean you're regulated all the time, that you're always going to get it right. It's a lot of pressure, and it's incredibly difficult. It requires you to prioritize care for yourself, even as you care for your kids. Let's hear from our first panelist for some practical tips on how to do this. Raizel Kelson is a dear, longstanding colleague of mine. She's a clinical supervisor of OHEL's Early Childhood Mental Health Program, a program that treats young children as young as 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5 years old. Treating a 2 and 3-year-old is not the same as treating a mini 7-year-old. It actually requires a special expertise and always involves the caregiver. Raizel is trained in many evidence-based practices in early childhood work and has worked with OHEL consulting on our preschool resource and book, I Feel That Way and That's Okay, doing trainings for teachers and parents alike on resilience and attachment. Razel is here today on a break from her maternity leave because she so badly wants to help the community and do what she can to support you during this time. Razel, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Tsivi. So I want to start with asking, what do children need from their parents? And we certainly know they need their basic needs met. But children, from the time they are born, use their parents to understand the world around them and to understand themselves. And certainly, this is true for our young children, 0 to 3. They are learning about what the world is about through watching their parent. They are closely connected to their parents and they're paying attention to their parents' experiences to understand what is this whole world about. And they also are using their parents to understand what am I experiencing inside my body. This is particularly important in those early attachment years. And caregivers are helping a child learn how to soothe and help a child learn what is safe and what is dangerous. And even as children get older, because we're looking today at young children, but even our 3, let's say our 5 to 9-year-olds, their world is expanding. So they're also learning about the world from peers and neighbors, but hopefully they also return, this is a very natural process, to their parents when they encounter something that is overwhelming, even positively overwhelming, but certainly if it's scary and they want to make sense of it, they return to their parents to help them understand what is going on and also to regulate their system. So parents are like guides that help children understand the world. And in safe times, this process, although always very complex, is really very natural for many caregivers as they guide their children to become healthy adults. But what happens when caregivers can't make sense of the events around them? What if you yourself don't feel regulated or safe in the world? How can you provide that for your child? And that's really what I want to look at today. I want to balance two ideas, and then I want to take a moment to kind of talk about how you can go between these two ideas. So, the first one I kind of set the stage is that you're really important, that you really help your child, that you are enough, that you have it within you to help guide your child. And I looking at it with I want to just give some practical ways that you can create safety even if the world outside doesn't feel very safe. And one thing you can do is create routines. Routines, even when children are not in school, it doesn't mean routine has to be like military style, right? Like this is what happens and this is what happens, but just the idea that breakfast has a certain feel and bedtime has a certain steps that we go through. Predictability is closely related to safety. And actually, trauma is closely related to things being not predictable and uncontrollable. So, within just the space of your home, if you can create predictability, you can help a young child feel safety. You can also engage in play. Play is children's way of understanding the world around them, of making sense. And play is also a way for you and your child to enjoy each other. So, if you can join imaginative play or board games, those can really help a child feel safe or feel connected or feel regulated. And it can also do that for you. And if you are feeling too exhausted or overwhelmed to tap into a sort of playful, imaginative place, you can also use proximity. Being close to young children, physically close, is deeply healing. So your child's playing with something on the floor, sitting on the floor, being near them can help them feel connected and safe. Touch, patting, a hug, things like that. So it doesn't require you to do something really, really overwhelming. It can be something small like that, and it can be very profound. But I want to hold another truth. At the same time, even though I just said you are so important, I want to give you permission to get it wrong. There is no perfect parent. And when we add the stress of war on top of normal life stressors, so the big ones, marital stress, financial stress, but even the smaller ones, but they can feel really big in the moment, right? Tantrums, developmental issues, sibling fighting, all these stressors that we go through. And then we add a huge stress such as wartime. I want you to give yourself permission to not always get it right and to not always know what to do and even to do it wrong. Messing up is part of being a parent. And I want you to think that messing up and doing what is quote unquote the wrong thing and not responding to your child in a way that you are necessarily proud of offers a beautiful opportunity for repair. And repair is what makes our relationships so close and so meaningful. So I want to kind of paint what this can look like. So imagine that you just put it's the kids have been home all day, you've been trying to entertain them, trying to keep routine, and you put out supper that you think is nourishing and wholesome, or maybe it's lunch because you're a little bit more Israeli, and one of your children come in and see it and they respond with, "Oh, what? You're serving that? I hate that." And there's sort of like this meltdown and they just suck the joy of the room out and everyone is listening to this ranting. And you have just gotten off the phone with a neighbor whose husband is not home. He is serving and she has shared her own fears and sadness and worries with you. And you're holding that within you. And you don't have room to hold this child's tantrum. And also, mind you, this child ate this exact supper just last week. And you snap, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you respond, so don't eat it. You'll be hungry. Whatever you feel is not really connecting, right? You just don't have room to hold it. Now, a little later, when your body calms down, and I say this when you calm down, because when we are dysregulated and so worked up, we don't access reflection. That's okay. A little later on, you reflect on how that went down and you feel like, I didn't want to respond that way to my child. And you feel a deep desire to be close again to that child. And that's really important because that's what love is, right? We want to be connected. We desire to be close to them. And you can take that moment to kind of reflect, like, what was that about? Why was that child having such a meltdown? Maybe you will have insight. Maybe you will think, you know what? I bet that child overheard my conversation and is carrying the same worries as me. Or maybe you know this child is particularly attuned to you and felt your stress and worries and disconnection and responded in a way little children respond, which is quite immature and frustrating, but that's how they show us. Help, this is too much for me. And you can use that then to repair. And repair does not mean you sit down and discuss with them all these concepts of misattunement. Repair just means that you seek to be close and connected. Maybe you say, hey, you want to read a book together, right? We're thinking of our little kids. Maybe a kid who's a little older who can kind of remember that event from the day before. The next day, you maybe serve them something you know they like, and you let them know, I know you like this. I made it for you. In that moment, there's connection. So it's okay if you get it wrong. There's moments for you to reconnect. It's hard. It's impossible to get it always right. So I want to briefly talk about how do we bridge these two truths. On the one hand, you are so important. Your child needs you to regulate and to understand the world around them. And on the other hand, you're not always going to get it right. And you're going to feel dysregulated and you're not always going to be present. So one thing I want to suggest is that there's a lot of things we can't control. We cannot control the world around us. We cannot even really control our children, which the more you come to peace with that, I think the less frustration you might experience in parenting. But we can sometimes control our body and we can slow our body down. We can sometimes use our breath to move from a dysregulated state to a more regulated state. And one way to think about this is that when we're dysregulated and when we're feeling anxiety, our breath is fast and shallow because it's preparing our system to start pumping blood and adrenaline to rush so that we can fight or flight, whatever is needed. But that can be in certain moments very, very helpful. But when we're sitting at home trying to navigate a child's behaviors or needs or helping them regulate, it's really not so helpful. And all you might need to do is reset that breath. So that can look like breathing in deeply through your nose, filling your lungs, holding it, and breathing out slowly through pursed lips like this. That's it. And it resets that system so that maybe you can have more reflection and can feel a little calmer. If breathing doesn't feel right to you, you can also just try to ground yourself where you are. So if your mind is running on worries of what's going on in the world or things outside or people you're close with, you can focus on something. It can be something you can hold and use your five senses to pay attention to it. So feeling it, smelling it, noticing its colors, touching it. If it's appropriate, you can eat it. Or it can be something you're just noticing in the room to ground you, to be present so that you can help your child regulate. Now, let's say your child's really dysregulated and it's really hard to regulate in front of a very dysregulated child. I would advise stepping out of the presence of that dysregulated child, giving yourself a moment to do one of those activities, whatever you need. I call it a mommy timeout. So whatever you need to get back into a place where you feel a little more regulated and you can join your child. I want to remind you that being regulated does not mean, and I think Sivi also just touched on this, in this pure place of Zen where calmness is just running through your body. Being regulated can mean that you are holding fear and sadness and anger within you and you are also present in front of your child. And finally, so you can use this sort of tool to go from a dysregulated state to a more regulated state. And I want to also, this is something I learned actually in graduate school when I was learning about all the awful things. I was specializing in children that can happen to children. And one of my professors recommended that we also take time to be fully present in healthy parent-child relationships, whether our own or to witness them in our lives, and to really pay attention to healthiness. So I want to invite you to use your children to help you feel some of the joy and to feel regulated in the world. Smell your child's head, right? The smell of little children. Feel the softness of their skin. Put their little hands inside your hands, and use those moments to remind yourself of some of the love you have within you, the joy you can feel, and help yourself regulate in these really trying times.
Thank you, Razel. Thank you so much. Those very important remarks. I want to just summarize a little bit about what you just said. You said a lot of important things, but I think one of the most important things as a parent from my perspective was you spoke about it's okay to not get it right, that there's going to be a lot of times where you just, especially now, don't have the space to hold your child's feelings, and that's okay. And there'll always be an opportunity for repair, and there's always going to be an opportunity for connection and to reconnect. I think Dr. Blumenthal, one of his favorite expressions is the bus will always come around again, and there's going to be other opportunities to engage with that child and to reconnect and to sort of get it right. Maybe the second time, the third time, the 20th time, but you'll always have those opportunities. And Razel also spoke about resetting. How do you do that? How do you kind of reset yourself to try again for that connection? And that can happen through something as simple as taking a deep breath, grounding yourself, using your senses so that you can be more present, and taking a timeout. We think about timeouts as being for kids, but actually timeouts are actually really good for moms too. Obviously, you need a safe place and another caregiver for your child, but taking a moment to just step out and give yourself that space and that grace, and then return to connect in a different way with your child. So thank you, Razel, for those helpful tips. And now I am pleased to introduce Dr. Peril Agishton. Dr. Agishton is joining us from Israel. We really appreciate you being here, everything that you're going through, all of you are going through. Dr. Agishton is a pediatric clinical neuropsychologist in Rehovot, specializing in anxiety, OCD, and mood disorders. She's trained in a variety of modalities, including CBT and EFT, and has expertise in both treatment and assessment. She views her work through an attachment lens and continues to engage in research regarding attachment processes, everyday stress, and anxiety. Dr. Agishton is the founder of Lifespan Neuropsychology. She works with patients online in Jerusalem and around the world. Dr. Agishton is also a mother of young children currently living through this war in Israel. She will talk to us today not only about her professional perspective, but really what we want to hear, what does this actually look like on the ground? How are you managing, not just as a psychologist, but as a mother? Is it possible, Dr. Agishton, to follow your own advice in time of war?
I want to start with a little anecdote. Life is very busy here. And I just want to make a disclaimer, which everybody participating from Israel understands, which is that if a siren goes off, my office is the bomb shelter and all my kids will come piling in. And that's what life is like right here. We've had numerous sirens going off during sessions, etc. But the disclaimer is that I didn't have a lot of time to prepare because a siren went off pretty soon before this speech. And so I was sort of going around polling my family members, and I said to my husband, I'm giving this talk. What should I say? And he said to me, well, there's your failure right there. Pointing out one of my 6 kids who's really been the very anxious one through this. And I giggled. And I acknowledge, yes, like this child, I don't really have the tools right now to fully calm him down and regulate him. He happens to be high anxiety in general. But also it's such an important point, which is that we're dealing with a situation that's not regular stress. This isn't regular grief. This isn't regular trauma, post a traumatic event. This isn't regular, very stressful situation. This is the most high stakes kind of chronic stress that you can imagine, which is that we're dealing with a population of millions of little kids who are being shot at, and they hear loud booms and they hear sirens and they have to run for shelter, and they all know already. My 3-year-old knows that when those sirens go off, he races for shelter. So it's not a regular kind of situation. And, I'm an anxiety specialist, and I know all these tools, and I work with kids with anxiety, and these tools don't really get you all the way there in this situation. So we're not aiming for perfection. We're just aiming to get our kids through this in as safe a way as possible. That's what we're aiming for. We're aiming to get our kids through this in a resilient way. And kids are tremendously resilient. And what we're all learning from this is that the Jewish people is tremendously resilient. But know that, the regular tools aren't going to help, and that's okay. Give yourself permission to not achieve perfection over here with getting yourself through and with getting your kids through this. This is an incredibly difficult situation. So the first thing that I think everyone needs to know, and I think we all do know this on some level, but we just need to really confront this, is that our kids are all very stressed. Even very, very little ones, kids under a year, are sensing their sensing their parents' stress, hearing the rockets, racing to shelter. They're all very, very stressed, even if it doesn't look like stress to you. The stress responses that we're seeing are fascinating and run this wide range depending on the age and depending on the kid. And I just wanted to sort of share a small smattering of the stress responses that I'm seeing as a psychologist, that my colleagues are seeing, anecdotes that I'm hearing. So here's an example. My husband's CTO, who had his first kid in his 40s, child of Holocaust survivors, and he tends to shut down his emotions. He has a 2-year-old son now who can't have either of his parents leave the room. He needs both parents next to him all the time. And he's sitting there complaining to my husband about this. And my husband, who's the husband of a psychologist, says to him, he's anxious. And he couldn't believe it. Why? He's 2. He's nonverbal. He doesn't really know what's going on. But yeah, that's how a 2-year-old might experience and might relate to the stress. He needs to have both parents near him all the time. 12-year-old girl who just started bedwetting. An 11-year-old boy who developed a terrible stutter. A 9-year-old girl who all of a sudden started fighting with her 3-year-old sister over dolls. Wants to have those dolls. I was in the grocery store and I saw my daughter's classmate. My daughter's in 5th grade. I saw her classmate walking around. This was on Sunday, right after everything. And her mother must have sent her to the store for something, because that's what you do here in Israel. And she was sucking her thumb in the store. That's not typical behavior for a 5th grade girl. We're hearing tons of people with diarrhea and constipation and stomach hurting, and 5-year-old girl who this is a child of a colleague, child being treated by a colleague, 5-year-old girl who's having constant stomach pain and is crying that, daddy's the one who rubs my stomach and he's not here. And that's her way of expressing her anxiety over the fact that her father is in the reserves. So these are all stress responses. The first thing we need to do is realize that for ourselves, that our child is experiencing stress, whether or not they're verbally, expressing it. And then what do you do with that? Validating that stress. So this is a general principle for every kind of emotional regulation. Whenever you're regulating your child's emotion, the first thing you want to do is validate their feelings. Validating their feelings doesn't mean that, their reaction is correct or right or what they're afraid of is true. All it means is that you're feeling that way and that feeling makes sense. And you could label that feeling and put words to it. And when your 5-year-old comes to you and says, my stomach's hurting, you could say, oh, I'm so sorry, it's hurting. Can I get you a hot water bottle? But you could also say, oh, maybe you're feeling a little bit scared because we just had a siren. Can I get you a hot water bottle? So labeling the feeling and validating it is always going to be the first step for helping very young kids and older kids regulate. And then the next step will be giving them tools, giving them tools for calming themselves down and giving them confidence that they can handle it. So you're validating the feeling, and then you're giving them resilience, which is those tools and which is confidence. We're going to get through this. So first of all, how do you validate? Right? What do you do? I think just developing for yourself a quick mantra of what to say when a child comes to you with verbal fear, with verbal stress, or with a nonverbal stress response, I think what can be very helpful is just to know what you can say, and to have like that automatic response at your fingertips. And it can be very simple. You can say, "Yo, this is scary," or you can say, "Of course you're feeling that way," or you can say, "That makes sense." And that just very short validation helps your child feel seen and heard. And I think the next step is to try to be curious. So try to understand what they're seeing. At it was around 8 o'clock maybe tonight, and we had a siren. I was lying in my bed with two of my kids, reading them a book, and there was a siren, and we all very calmly got up and went, straight to the bomb shelter and closed the door. Anyway, calmly enough. It's been going on for a while. And and happens to be, I had a son in there who was watching the end of a movie. We have been like rationing out some screen time, which is not usual for us, but this is what you do in wartime when you need your kids to feel distracted and get them to clean the house, because your cleaning ladies aren't coming to work. So we're watching the end of a movie, and my son, afterwards, my little 3-year-old says to me something about rockets. So I'm sitting on the floor reading him a book, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, you want to know?" Well, like, and I start explaining to him, "Well, yeah, like you heard the rocket siren because you want to know why there are rockets." And I'm starting to explain it to him, and he's like, "No, mommy, like the rockets, the plane in the movie." It's like, "Oh, okay." I don't have to go there. It's just being very curious what your child thinks is happening, and sitting with it and confronting it. Don't just gloss over that. Don't just move on. When your child gives you anything to work with, you take the time to explain it to them on their level, and filtering out. Obviously, you're filtering out a ton, but on their level, taking the time to be curious and hear what they're experiencing, because we really have no idea what's going on through their eyes. It's very hard to know what they're seeing unless we sort of draw it out. Having your children say their narrative, having your children talk, is going to be incredibly healing, right? So sitting with them and schmoozing, and having the older kids write a story, even having them call their grandparents, if their grandparents are in the US, and telling them the story of what it was like, Simchas Torah morning when the siren started going off. Having your child organize their experience, and this is for the older, more verbal children, is tremendously healing. And that's one of the things that we see really attenuates the trauma response. It really makes the trauma response much less active when you're able to sort of organize it. Here's the thing: a lot of kids aren't verbal, right? So for the kids who aren't verbal, I think, Rachel, you were speaking to this a little bit. First of all, play is tremendous. So getting on the floor with them and playing and listening to their play and hearing what they're saying. I actually bought balloons to keep in my mamad, because one tip that clouds were sharing was having breathing things to do in your mamad. So I bought a bunch of balloons, and the kids are all blowing up balloons and popping them and hanging out with the balloons. And all of a sudden, there's a whole game going on, between my 7-year-old son and my 5-year-old daughter, where the balloon is Hamas, and we have to keep it up. And if it falls, then it's a rocket falling. So my response was to like get tense, like, "Oh, this is a terrible game for my, terribly violent and scary game." And then I'm like, "No, this is how they're processing it. And they're keeping that balloon in the air, and they are winning against Hamas. Like, okay, this is what's going on for them right now. This is how they're processing it, and that's fine." So having your child process it through play, having your child draw pictures, getting a bunch of markers and a bunch of crayons and sitting down with them and drawing pictures of what's going on for them, what they're feeling. My daughter's school sent out this beautiful exercise where they have each day the girls draw hearts, and they color in the hearts, like, what percentage they're feeling of, half of it is happy, half of it is calm, half of it is scared, bored. And it's just a beautiful way of getting children to non-verbally talk about their feelings. So you really want to help them organize their feelings for them, validate their feelings and organize them. And then, in terms of what to do after that piece, right? So once you validate their feelings, once you organize them, once you bring them out as much as you can, once you're curious about them, what can you do to help your children actually calm down? So in general, the biggest way to deal with stress, and I am an attachment researcher, the biggest way to deal with stress in general is through connection. And connection to a bunch of different things. So first of all, connection to other people is huge. Connection to your attachment figures are huge. Connection to the people who you feel loved with, the people who you feel secure with is tremendous. So in a time of war, what you want to be doing is having as much physical proximity as you possibly can. First of all, like literally just sitting in the same room, sitting on the floor close to them, this is what you were saying, Rachel, but also hugging and kissing and snuggling way more than you normally would, and giving your child a second hug and a kiss before bed, and a third hug and a kiss before bed. Really, really working on that connection. And as hard as this is, and of course, as we're saying this, we're all balancing in our heads, you know, you have to have, it's with whatever capacity you have, but with the capacity you have and with the energy that you have, focusing on giving them that sense of security and attachment is tremendous. Attachment to other people. So seeking out play dates with their friends, seeking out Zoom calls and phone calls with loved ones in America, with loved ones here. Having guests for Shabbat, if that's still an option wherever you're being, but whatever physical connection could look like, and friends could look like, and friendships could look like, that's a hugely calming kind of way of keeping them resilient. And then connection to other things. So first of all, connection to Hashem is tremendous. Depending on the kid's level, if kids as young as 3 can understand, okay, Hashem is keeping me safe. And when you go into the Hamad, we have all of our Sefer Tehillim here, and my son has his Sefer Tehillim, and my daughter has her Sefer Tehillim, and I have my Sefer Tehillim. And we don't say Tehillim every time we go into the bomb shelter, but once in a while when we're there and when we're feeling nervous, we'll say Tehillim together, and we talk a lot about the fact that Hashem is protecting the Jews right now, and filtering, but showing them some of the videos that talk about the nisim that Hashem's doing with different chayalim right now. Like, that is tremendous to sort of strengthen that feeling of connection to the nation of Israel, connection to, the Jewish people, talking about what everybody all over the world is doing for Jews right now. The idea of connection is usually helpful with reducing the trauma from something, right? When somebody organizes their feelings around something and is connecting to others through it, and is connecting to meaning, knows, okay, we're being fired up, but it's because we're holding on to this holy land, and we feel so lucky to be here right now. That is, what's going to give your kid the resilience to get through this. I just want to see if I had anything else that I wanted to talk about. There are some more practical tips that maybe we'll talk about when we get to the questions, but just in terms of like what to do, routine, and what to do when your kids are scared of going into the bomb shelter, and how to keep your kids sort of grounded and with a secure, solid foundation. But I just wanted to say one more thing. If I have the time still, do I have one more minute?
Yeah, no, please go ahead. This is great. This is pearls of wisdom everyone needs to hear. Please continue.
So one thing that I just want to say to all your mothers out there, again, like, the regular tools don't work. So I know, take care of yourself, and you need to give to yourself in order to give to other people. And those don't really work. They didn't work during COVID, and they work even less now, right? During COVID, we were all home all the time, kids all the time. Now we're all home all the time, kids all the time. And thank God, it looks like some schools are starting up again slowly, but in Rehovot, all the schools are still closed. And I'm sure in most of the country, all the schools are still closed. So you're all home, all the kids all the time, with rockets being fired at you and tremendous anxiety. I think, most parents right now in Israel are experiencing a mixture of anxiety and heartbreak, and yeah, you don't really need to, I don't really need to elaborate on that at all. So it's easier said than done to take time to give to yourself in order to give to other people. But it doesn't make it less important. You do need to take care of yourself. So you sort of have to be very creative with how you can take care of yourself right now. And some ideas that I think, have been working for people and are good ideas to do is, first of all, the grounding and the breathing is tremendous. Thank you, Rachel, for talking about that. I think a lot of us are going around with a pit in our stomach, and maybe and then you go back to your everyday, we're compartmentalizing, right? We're compartmentalizing. Maybe we're going around with a pit in our stomach. Maybe we're only having a pit in our stomach when we think about what's going on. It's getting harder in some ways and easier in some ways as the war goes on. It's getting easier because maybe life has to go on, and we're going out and we're getting groceries, and it's getting harder because it feels like we're in it for the long haul, and because it's harder to forget that we're here. So I think it's incredibly important to be able to be creative about giving yourself a little bit of space. So what could that look like? First of all, when you have the pit in your stomach, take a minute to breathe. If the pit in your stomach, that dread is going to come in, and it's going to overtake you for a minute, and take literally 30 seconds to say to yourself, yeah, this is scary, right? The same way you would say that to your kid, say to yourself, acknowledge it. Oh, what a yucky feeling. This is really scary. You know, I even tell patients to use second person, right? Give themselves that attachment that they need, give themselves that nurturing that they need right then. They can also, obviously, it's even more powerful if you have somebody to turn to, but this is coming up again and again during the day for a lot of us. So just saying to yourself, whatever your nickname is, if your name is Chana and your father always called you Chanala, say to yourself, Chanala, this is really scary. And then do that breathing exercise that Rachel demonstrated so beautifully, and really, calm yourself down physiologically. And then you have to move on, because that's life, right? What else could this look like? What else could you do that's creative? You could have those rituals and have those routines for yourself, but also rituals for yourself. So making a ritual out of your coffee, if you always just had like instant coffee, now is the time to actually make yourself like a nice fancy coffee and put it in a mug and sit down with it, because that feels like a ritual, and that feels grounding, and that feels a little bit pampering. Pamper yourself with whatever it looks like. I had 5 minutes today before my next patient. I gave myself a manicure, and I felt so in control. I was like, oh, look, my nails are so pretty, right? So whatever you can do to pamper yourself and give yourself that sense of, I have a little bit of control around my surroundings. I have a little bit of control around my life right now. Another thing that I think is so important to remember, again, I'm going back to the attachment thing, is seeking comfort from things that remind you of who you are, and ground you and connect you to your family. So that could look like looking at an old album. It could look like listening to familiar music, right? Making yourself a playlist of familiar music, or of comforting music, or of nostalgic music. I can tell you that I was in the store. I was in Yesh on Friday, and my old Havdalah candle is gone. My Havdalah candle died, and I needed to buy a new one. And I went for like the really old fashioned blue and white braid one, because that to me was comforting. Like you're reaching out right now for anything that's comforting, anything that reminds you of simpler days at a simpler time, and who you are, and just grounding yourself in that, and connecting yourself to that, and figuring out ways of taking care of yourself in 5-minute increments, in 3-minute increments. If you need a break and you need to go into the bathroom and cry for a minute, and then wash your face and put on some moisturizer, that's okay. Take that break and then keep on going, because we're so good at doing that, and connecting to Tehillim and reaching out to others. That's all, how we're going to get through this.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Agerstein, for that extremely, I think, down-to-earth and real summary, and some just really practical tips that I hope are going to help a lot of our mothers. Just to summarize, you said that some of the regular tools that we might usually employ may not work, and that's okay. It's important to be kind to yourself, that you're going to see a range of stress responses in your children. And in order to help your kids, you gave a lot of really good suggestions, including the importance of validating their feelings, naming their feelings, I guess bearing witness to them, having a quick mantra at the ready, like kind of like an automatic kind of phrase or response that you can give over to them. Just kind of think about it and just have it at the ready, so you don't have to think about it. Being curious about what they're saying, don't necessarily assume, but being curious and kind of finding out more. For verbal kids, giving them the opportunity to tell their story, and for nonverbal kids to kind of do that through play. Play is really the language of young children. It's really powerful. It'll give you a lot of insight into their world. Dealing with stress through connection, and I think Rachel also spoke about this, through physical proximity to your children, of which many of you have no choice, because you are truly in very close physical proximity sometimes, whether you like it or not. But just hugs, physical affection, and also connection, not only to each other and to your children, but to Hashem. And then finding, amidst all the chaos, some small ways of nurturing yourself through ritual, through grounding, and through turning to the familiar. So those are just some of the things that you said in summary. It was really, really helpful and practical. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that summary. It sounded much better.
So I had really good material to work with. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Norman Blumenthal. Dr. Blumenthal is the Director of Trauma for Ohel Zachter Family National Trauma Center. Dr. Blumenthal is my mentor. and really has been a tremendous support, I think, really to the community, kind of a stabilizing source of support during these very trying times. He's been on countless webinars and in groups and different sessions to help the community during this difficult time. And we're very interested in hearing some of his practical tips and guidelines to help parents right now. Thank you, Dr. Blumenthal.
Okay, thank you very much. Listening to Razel Kielsen and Dr. Ackerstein, I'm reminded of the old story I tell of a senior rabbi who went to an out-of-town community where there was a very young new rabbi, and he gave a speech, and he gave one of his masterful oratorical speeches. And afterwards, the young rabbi said to him, "Rabbi, that was a beautiful speech. I wished I had given it." And he said to him, "You will. I'm listening to saying I wished I had given these speeches, and I'm gonna and take full personal credit for it." But it was really spectacular what both of you had to say. There's so little I can add. In fact, I think I was sort of picked to be last. One of my outlets is hiking, and I try to go once a month to a beautiful area and hike. And when there's a large group, you have someone whose role is to be what's in Hebrew called the ma'asef, but in English called the sweep, which is to be behind the last person, make sure everybody is staying together. And sometimes you have a hike where there are stragglers, people get hurt, and something you have to stay behind. And sometimes you're just the last guy in the hike, and there's not much to add. And that's how I feel right now. I'm the last guy in the hike, and there's not much to add. Also, by the way, listening to Tzivi introducing everybody, she reminded me of the person who wrote his autobiography and forgot to mention himself. Tzivi is a mainstay of our team and is the innovator and the inspiration of the team. It always comes up with new ideas and always makes sure that some of us who are not too well organized become organized. And we're really grateful for all that she does. I don't know if I'm going to add much, but I'm going to resonate with much what people said and maybe add a point or two and then maybe end with a story. A lot of talk was about connection, and connections are so important. We do bereavement weekends, Lo Aleinu, for parents who lost children, Av Shakul, Em Shakula. And sometimes people ask us, what do you do for them? You can't bring their child back. And sometimes the metaphor I give them is, imagine somebody carrying something very heavy. So I take my shoulder and take a corner. And that's a lot of what we do. In fact, I will share with you the Devar Torah I told over at the last Shabbat table, as we're still reeling from all this news. Cain was forced into exile. And, he was afraid he'd be vulnerable, he'd be harmed and be hurt. And Hashem said that he'll give him an oath, he'll give him a sign or a letter that'll be imprinted on his forehead so that he'll be safe. And the rabbis go to town trying to figure out what was that sign, what was that letter. And some of the rabbis say it was a letter from God's name. And then, of course, there's an argument that it's Jews. So which letter? And one opinion it was the Yud, but one opinion was that it was the Vav. Why the Vav? And I was trying to remember where I saw it. I thought it was the Chatan Sofer, but I looked there and it wasn't there. But I know I saw someplace once. The Vav is the Vav HaChibur. The Vav is the conjunctive letter. And wearing the Vav on his forehead was saying to everybody, you're not alone. And you're connected. And that is our safety. And I think right now we're all wearing a Vav on our forehead. And we're looking for that connection, and we have to exploit that. We have to turn to each other, and we have to support each other. I think we have to remember as well that not one size fits all. I often tell people, I'm going to give you a piece of advice, and maybe it's useful, maybe it's not. You have to take it seriously. But if you think about it and it's not relevant to you, then I'm wrong. And we all have to remember that everything that's said, and these are gems, really gems. Pick from them, take from them, use it, adapt it to yourself. But everybody is unique. In fact, I will share with you something that harks back many more years than I care to think, but how I learned what empathy is. We all know the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is I know the other person's hurting, but I don't understand that. Empathy means you can put yourself in somebody else's place. And this is an experience I have where I learned that empathy. In the very early in my career, I'm also a child of a Holocaust survivor, and I did work in the children of Holocaust survivors, and I worked in a unit in the hospital that specialized for psychiatrically hospitalized children of Holocaust survivors. Some fascinating work. And the unit chief was a contemporary of the survivors, but American born and raised, Jewish, but unaffiliated. Name was Sylvia Axelrod, remarkable woman. And we presented and we published, and this became a topic. And there was a neighboring psychiatric facility that had a Holocaust survivor who was hospitalized. So the people, the staff had heard our presentations. And at that time, the thinking was, you have to get the survivor to talk about it. So they kept asking her, oh, you're in the survivor of the Holocaust, tell us about it. And she said, there's nothing to talk about. And they were very confused. So they called us in, they called Sylvie in as a consultant. I was what we call in French, the Mitschlepper. I was the sorcerer's apprentice. I just came along as the young, new psychologist who just, happened to be working with her. And the format then was the staff presented the case. The guest consultant would interview the patient, and then they would discuss it. So they present the case. We have the survivor. Every time we bring it up, she poo-poos it, she downplays it. So I bring out the patient, and Sylvia's interviewing her, and she's telling her asking about her hospitalization, her medication, her treatment. Then she said, I understand you survived the Nazi concentration camps. And the woman said, yeah. She said, I just want you to know that as an American who's never lived through anything like this, there's no way I could know what that's like. And the woman began to cry and say, finally, someone who understands. And therefore, I very humbly say to all of you parents, I hope I'm helpful, but my true and I realize that true empathy means I can't know. And I can say that about everybody to varying degrees that I've worked with, but I certainly have to say it to you. Living through what you're living through. And I'm sitting here in America. I think probably the most empathic thing I can say to you is I really don't know. I do want to mention that just a few little points that maybe were said, but can also be said again. Trauma is dealt with in spurts. Now, we have a little bit more of a luxury here in America being removed to deal with in spurts. You don't, because you never know when the siren's coming. But as much as we can, we visit it and then we retreat. And we visit it and we retreat. That's how we would do it naturally. And I think in many beautiful ways, this was expressed, whether it's buying a Havdalah candle or, doing your nails or whatever else. Take those breaks. In fact, it's interesting when I supervise interns or residents, and sometimes they'll have an amazing session. And there's a breakthrough, there's a childhood memory that's recalled, and they come to supervision and they're very excited, and they should be. And then we process it, and then at the very end of the supervision, I give them a warning. I tell them, don't be surprised if in the next session they talk to you about the weather. And that's very often the case, because we visit it, but we also have to retreat. And the same thing for our children, we have to let them visit it, and we also have to let them retreat. Also, children, by the way, have a remarkable ability to sometimes hear bad news or have something scary happen and then retreat. Similar process. I know that sometimes when we on the trauma team have to do a death notification, something like that. And if we're dealing with a young child, sometimes their response will be, can I go to my room? Can I play a game? I think what's the matter with them? But they have a remarkable ability to sort of retreat and then come back when they're ready and ask questions and process it in bite-sized portions. I often say jokingly, they usually come back at the single most inconvenient time imaginable. They just have a sixth sense to know that you're overwrought and busy, and that's when they ask you where babies come from. But they will come back, and the most important thing to say to them is, yeah, but you can come back. And it's especially important for those of you here in Israel, because this is what we often refer to as a shared traumatic reality. You're going through the same trauma. So sometimes children may want to protect you. And they don't want to ask you, they don't want to share their fears because they don't want to upset you. And you have to make it clear to them, yes, you're going, but as was indicated, and as I think Rachel said so well, being regulated doesn't mean you're unemotional. Being regulated means that you have control of your emotions, but you're allowing them expression as well. And that's very important for children to know. I remember Sherry Mendel telling me, and you all know who Sherry Mendel is, that within the month that Kobe was murdered, she was walking with her daughter, who's, I believe now already a mother herself, and she just started crying. And her daughter looked up to her scared, and she said to her, Mommy's got to cry for 30 seconds, and then Mommy's going to be fine. And she doesn't know how she did it, but exactly 30 seconds, she stopped crying. So that's the process. I want to conclude with one more thought. And then I think a story that really captures what we're doing for our children now under these dire circumstances. First of all, children are not pieces of porcelain. Again, it was said before, children are not China dolls. And nothing that ceases to amaze me, how resourceful children can be in terms of managing their stress and their anxiety. So I just remember that. Don't panic. Our children will find a way to get the help they need, and will endure this. I'm going to share again a personal story. My mother's a survivor of 7 concentration camps, had a life replete with trauma, even before the whole Holocaust. And one of the traumas was that when her mother and the family when they fled in World War I, got a taste of Western Europe and couldn't go back to the shtetl. So when she was 5 years old, her mother smuggled across the border into a Western European town, established citizenship, and then brought the family over. But it took a year when she was at age of 5, where she wasn't with her mother, and she wasn't told ahead of time because it was illegal, and so she couldn't know. So her mother just disappeared on her, and her father and her sister moved in with her grandmother and an aunt and uncle. And it was very painful because she would watch the aunt and uncle playing with the children, tending to the children, and her mommy wasn't there. But what she remembers was her grandmother, her Bub Shachaya. And every once in a while, Bub Shachaya would see her and see how sad she is, and would call her into the kitchen and give her some hot chocolate. And my mother was in her 50s, 60s, 70s, 90s, and would talk about that hot chocolate. I want to let the mothers here know, you're giving your children this hot chocolate. All the things that were mentioned, you're giving them that hot chocolate, and they're going to taste that hot chocolate until their 120th birthday, and even when Mashiach comes, which hopefully will be very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blumenthal, for all those also very practical guidelines, as well as the stories that always make it kind of come alive for everyone. Just to summarize what you said to remember that there's one size doesn't fit all, and that it's important to just take what's useful to you, and that whatever is not useful, then that's fine, because everyone is different, and what works for one person doesn't work for someone else. Dr. Blumenthal spoke about the in and out experience of trauma, kind of comes and goes in a wave, and you kind of visit it and need to retreat. You kind of can't stay in that acute state for too long. It's important to kind of take breaks from it. And I think Dr. Agerson also spoke about that. And that kids are also the same. And sometimes they'll visit something and then kind of retreat and then come back later to process it, and just know that that's kind of how it works. And that's okay. Maybe at an inconvenient time, probably will be at an inconvenient time, but you'll do your best. And again, the bus will come around again if you're not able to. Dr. Blumenthal reminds us that kids are very resourceful and resilient, and there's so much that you are doing in these little ways that are building that resilience for them, even amidst everything that you're going through. And finally, Dr. Blumenthal said something that I really just want to echo myself, and that is just really acknowledging for those of us in America is that we can't possibly really know. We know what we don't know, is that we can't possibly truly understand what you're going through, and just know that our hearts are with you really every minute of the day. And I give a shout out to my beautiful nieces, many of whom are on this webinar, and just know that we do what we can't truly understand, but just know that we're with you, we're davening for you, we're crying with you, and we're thinking of you truly every minute of the day. And now we don't have so much time for questions, but I think that the questions are really important. So I guess whoever wants to stay on, and if not, we will send the recording afterwards, where I will take time to give the panelists some questions that came in advance. Dr. Agustin, this question came in. How much information should I share with my 4-year-old? He doesn't really understand that we're in a war. He just knows that he's not in Gan right now and things are very tense. What should I be telling him? Dr. Agustin. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. It depends on the child, and it depends on the age, and it depends on the child at that age. There's no one size fits all. A couple of principles to keep in mind is that, number one, the unknown is scarier than the known. So you want to tell your child a little bit, any age, if a child is asking questions, even if they're not asking questions, if they're verbal, you want them to know a little bit. It could just be mean people are trying to hurt us, but the Israeli army is protecting us, right? It can be very, very little. When this first started, for the first few days, I had my anxious child. My door is open for better internet, but I had my anxious child asking me, were any children hurt? And I kept on saying, I don't know. And I did know. Didn't want to lie. Didn't want to make him more anxious. But he couldn't hear it then. At this point, he knows. But at that point, this 8-year-old child couldn't take that kind of knowledge. So you're titrating what you're saying, you're filtering what you're saying, you're telling every child on their level something about what's going on, because you don't want them to be imagining stuff that's worse than what's going on. And again, that principle of being curious about what they're thinking and what they're perceiving. Earlier tonight, there was a knock on the door, and it was actually takeout delivery, but we've been keeping our door locked, which we don't usually do because we're nervous. And my son, who was on the couch, says to me, Ma, you're not supposed to open the door. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, there could be terrorists. So I went over and sat next to him on the couch, and I talked to him about what he was thinking, and what that meant and what he's scared of, and reassured him. But he very makes sense that my 11-year-old, who started reading Mishpacha before I thought to hide it from him, had that fear, right? So you're really being very careful what you show children, and what you say to them, but definitely tell them something.
Okay. Dr. Blumenthal, we got this question. What if Abba is in the Miluim? What do I tell my young children about their father?
Wow. I think Raisy and Dr. Ackerstein would like to answer that. What do I tell my young children? First of all, today, I have to tell you that I made a mistake. And I know that I'm in the lot. Look, there was a lot of positive feedback for the webinars, and I can't even count how many I've done. But one of the things I tried to say was, let's insulate as much as we can 5 and younger or 4 and younger. Tell them it's far away, it's rare. And a lot of people come back and said, this is too immediate, and certainly in Israel, to do this. And our children really are not going to have that bubble of security, and we'll manage it. We'll cope with it. So we don't say, no, Abba is in the army. Abba is a very courageous man, a hero, and he's in the army to protect us and to punish the bad people. And one of the other issues we're grappling with, and I don't have time to go into it, is how we help children understand the level of evil, the total depravity, the barbarism that we witness. But once we've established that, Abba is going to be punishing the people. If they ask, we don't deny the danger. We can't. It's too immediate. It's too true. However, we emphasize, I think, 2 points. One is, he's not alone. He is with hundreds of thousands of other Abbas, and he has very good guns, and he has very good machinery, and he has very good equipment. Focus a lot on what is being done instead of the outcome. This is what we're doing. This is what Abba is doing. This is what Israel's doing, which was alluded to again earlier. And then I'm going to get back to the theme that was so much emphasized, which is, again, putting your shoulder on the corner of that package. Let him know the other Abbas are there too. And his classmates' Abbas are there too. This is hard to handle. This is scary. But if it's Soros Rabin, Chassi Nechama, if he's going through this with all of his classmates and with most of the 4-year-olds in this country, it doesn't do away with the fear, and it doesn't reduce it. Well, it does. I'm going to say it doesn't do away with the fear, but it does ameliorate it. It does make it more manageable. We're in this together. It's the Vav HaChibur. And that's something we can emphasize, and let him talk to his friends who have and ask them about their daddy and their, and who's there, and their brother, or whoever it might be.
Okay. Dr. Agerson, this question is for you. Do I tell my children that they are safe even when they hear the rockets and sirens outside? Can I truly guarantee that to them?
I was thinking of asking that question to Dr. Blumenthal. I'll tell you my thoughts. I want to hear your opinions after Lumenthal. I don't. My gut is to say we can't lie. We can't say I can guarantee that you are safe. Nothing will happen because things are happening to people who they know. You know, we don't. I don't have kids in the army, but I have first cousins in the army. Certainly, it's a scary time, and I don't think your kids need to know if they can trust you, and you're their security. So I just don't feel like we can 100% lie. I think what we could say to them is, oh, Hashem's right here next to us and he's keeping us safe. And you can talk about the Israeli army keeping you safe. And you can talk about how, you know, in this part of you could talk about statistics on their level, right? You can say, well, in this part of the country, nobody's been killed. And, whatever it is that can help them feel safe, I think you can say everything, but 100% you're safe. You can't say to them, nothing will happen, because that's just not true, and for many of us, bad things happen already to people who they know. For many of our kids have gone through, stuff themselves. So I don't think you can say to them, it won't happen to you. That's my gut. I could be off. One other thing I've been saying to my kids and to friends' kids, and I think it's something, it's just to empower kids, right? So in any way you can. So what I've been saying is, the first couple of days I gave it up because I lost patience. But the first couple of days I did a kindness contest, and whoever was kindest won a prize. But I would say, like, every time you do a mitzvah, you are creating an angel to stand in front of a soldier, and that's how you are protecting our country. And I said before that we're doing screen time now every other day as a reward for cleaning, even though we don't usually do screen time. I've been picking movies very deliberately. So I'm picking, like, Little Rascals or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, movies where the kids win, where the kids like do the, they're the heroes, where the kids are the heroes. You want to really empower your child to keep himself safe, to keep the Chayalim safe, to know that your Tehillim is saving people. You want to balance that with not putting too much on them, right? So if you said a mean word, it doesn't mean that malach disappeared, but I think that's something to keep in mind as you talk to them about whether or not they're safe. But that's just my gut. Dr. Blumenthal, I really would love to hear what you have to say about that, honestly.
I think you know better. You're there. I think pretty much the same ideas, but hug them, kiss them. Sometimes when I get a call or people tell me something, their friend, their neighbor, their relative had a terrible tragedy happen, what do I do? And I said, love them. Last night, I was presenting in a shul, and then there was the Q&A, and one woman raised her hand and said, my dearest childhood friend lives on Kibbutz Be'eri. I'm scared to call her. What do I do? So I told her what I've often told people when we do work in bereavement. What are some of the most meaningful shiva visits? And usually the shiva visits, one story, shiva visit, someone saying shiva for a 2-year-old. And someone came to the visit, worked their way up to the front, asked to see a picture, looked at the picture, cried for 10 minutes, said hamakom, and left. And he said that was the most comforting visit. So I think the same is true with our kids. When the scary thoughts come up, we hug them, we kiss them. The Hashem piece I struggle with, because it's a good one, and when we all have to access our belief in Hashem. With little children who think about it very concretely, Rachmana litzlan, if there isn't good news, and we promise them that Hashem will protect us. I remember hearing a story from the grandson of, was it the great grandson? No, I think it was the grandson of Moshe Feinstein, when Moshe Feinstein died. And he had a 4-year-old or something like that. And he and his wife were crying and crying, and they kept saying to the child, Hashem loves the Zaidi so much, that's why he wanted him with him, and Hashem loves Zaidi so much. And finally the 4-year-old said, well, Hashem may love Zaidi, but he sure doesn't like you and mommy too much, because they were crying so much. So I think I'm not sure. I'm doubt. I have my, I think it has to be done I think we do have to do that, because there is comfort, but I don't think we can overplay it, because and especially in the precarious situation we're in, we may not always get the best news about even people we don't know, or so I would portion that out a little bit more. That's my feeling. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. All right, one last question. My 2-year-old won't go into the miklat. He screams and runs away. What can I do to help him go there willingly? So again, I think Dr. Agerstein, I think you're best positioned to answer this.
So making it a fun place as much as you can. So I went, the first thing I did was I stocked up on tons of things for them. I'm glad I stocked up on things that are comforting. So first of all, we made pillowcases with fabric markers, and they have their pillowcases in here. They took them out now because I'm using it as an office, but they had their pillows in here. We put dolls in here and lots of books and breathing toys specifically. So balloons until my mother yelled at me because they're a choking hazard, but bubbles, lots and lots of bubbles, and not the kind that is a shooting gun, the kind that you can blow, because just breathing exercises can help. So making it a fun place, making it a comforting place, having lots of blankets, having lots of nash that's just for the miklat or just for the mamad. And then I would say if your 2-year-old is screaming, first of all, think about, it depends on the intensity, right? So if he's really upset and he just doesn't want to go, and if you can pick him up, if you have that capacity, if you don't have 3 other kids that you're trying to schlep, but if you could pick him up and hug him, and hug him tightly and just reassure him, you're safe, we're going to go here now, we're going to sit here for a little while, prepping him what to expect. We'll just sit here for a little while and then we'll go out. Then you should do that. But if you can't get down there, and if you have another option, if you can go into the stairwell, that's also okay. The last thing I would say is, there was one more thing I wanted to say about getting him in there. Oh, going in when you're not scared. So going into that same room when the alarm is not going off, and having a game in there and coloring in there, and just realizing this is not a terrifying place to be in. That applies more, I think, when it's a room, when it's in the basement of the building, and it could be scary. We get why kids are scared, and especially they're scared if it's associated with the siren. So associating it with fun things, putting on music when they're in there and dancing, if you can handle that, if you can stomach that while you're in fear. Those are all things that I think could practically help.
Wow. Okay. No, those are really good concrete suggestions. Thank you so much, really, Dr. Agerstein, and to all of our panelists. We really appreciate you being here today. Just want to say there's going to be a survey that's going to automatically pop up when we close out the webinar, so you can give us your feedback and also ideas for any future webinars, because we're here to support you in any way that we can. So we're definitely interested in hearing what you think would be helpful, and we'll do our best to follow that through. So thank you so much, everyone, and stay safe. We're with you.
Thank you for supporting us. We feel it here.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Take care.